glorious things about having Google Workspace. Another glorious thing about having Google Workspace is that that also opens up some of the additional meeting tools in Google Meet. And one of the ones that I know about and use regularly is the Q&A function. So if you go to the little 9 dot thing in the corner and open that up to meeting tools, there's a Q&A function in there, and I believe you can submit questions, ask questions anonymously, and like thumbs up other people's questions so that they get answered. And I have found it so useful because then it's often very hard to keep up with the chat, but that keeps all of the specific questions in one spot. So if folks do want to use that to submit questions, that will be really helpful. The last time I was here, I went like hard on presentation mode, and I don't want to do that again. So I have some thoughts that I wanted to share and a bit about my background for those of you that aren't familiar with me. But then I want to make this a little bit more of a conversation if we can. Talk a little bit more about any questions that y'all have. Dive into some of the situations that you're navigating right now. This has been a year. So the more that we can do to support each other through it, the better, in my opinion. And I just love the fact that y'all have put together this group and it's so amazing and I love it so much. So as a bit of background on me, my name is Whitney. I use she, her pronouns. I'm based in Baltimore, Maryland. I used to be in the DC area, like further closer to DC. And in Arlington for a little bit, but made the move back up to Baltimore this past year and have been loving it. So any of my fellow Baltimore people, I'm here and it's a wonderful place to be. I have been working for myself for more than 10 years now, entirely in the international development sector, with some toeholds into other areas in general marketing, working with real estate companies, with finance companies, currently working with a mortgage training provider, all kinds of different clients, honestly. The first 4 years of that I did completely by myself after really falling into consulting in a completely unsolicited, unwanted way after I lost my job in December of 1 year and didn't know what I was going to be doing for the next year. And ended up consulting because it seemed like a thing that I could do in the meantime. Turns out 10 years later that this really worked for me. So then I spent 6 years running Bid Boss Consulting with my co-founder, Sarah Jane Boblitz, who has been fantastic. And we really just, over the course of the last year, have decided to stop doing that business, which had worked ourselves back into a full-time job, in order to actually spend more time working with clients one-on-one, get back in the consulting game, but get back in that like solopreneur life, which is great. Over the course of that time, though, those 6 years that I was at Bid Boss, I worked with probably 60 different individual consultants, many of them as they were like first starting up their job. So really making that leap from full-time employment into the working for yourself world. And I've seen a lot of the ups and downs of that. I am usually very transparent with people that consulting life and the unpredictability, uncertainty that goes with it is not for everyone, but especially this year, and especially with all of the changes that are happening right now, I think that some of the flexibility and freedom that comes with consulting and working for yourself in any capacity is really attractive, especially the ability to pick up and work from different locations, potentially different countries. All of that's really valuable. And I see a lot of people looking to do that either in the short term or as maybe more of a long-term transition. So I've always loved working with people one-on-one. I have been an executive coach for the last 5 years, working with people as they're navigating either career transitions or really solo consulting life. And so when I got a bunch of unsolicited free time earlier this year, when all of my USAID proposal work suddenly evaporated, um, I designed a couple of courses that are specifically for people who are looking to start freelance careers. So that's how we initially got connected, and I saw the Pivoting Parents world kind of appear, and it was such a great thing. So with that in mind, I wanted to spend just a couple of minutes talking about a couple of things that I see as, the most frequently asked questions I get from people who are considering working for themselves, and maybe a couple of things that I see as challenges that I kind of like to warn people about ahead of time. Um, Usually, one of the first questions I get is about registering your business or not registering your business, or becoming an LLC or not becoming an LLC. And while I can answer that question, I also just put together a free guide on my website, which I will drop in the chat, which breaks it all down for you. So that's a much easier way to answer that question. The long and short of it is, yeah, you should probably register. It's not that hard. All of us have lots of experience filling out paperwork. So I believe wholeheartedly that all of you can do it without assistance from somebody else. So free guide now in the chat so that you can capture that. The other big question that I often get is about setting rates. This is a little bit harder to provide guidance on because it varies so much based on who your clients are going to be. So I always say that that's something that's really worth looking at from two sides. I think it's important to look at what your household expenses are, how much money you need to be making, where that target is going to be. And often that is highly dependent on how many hours you actually have available to be working to set your rates. And you should be looking at what kind of the market rates are. Because the sweet spot that you're going to be in is where both of those things work. Because if you're not making enough to take care of yourself and your family, that's not going to be sustainable. And if you're attempting to charge rates that your clients can't afford, or you're significantly undercharging your clients, that can also result in not getting the level of work that you want. So it's really about a balancing act, and a lot of that is very individual. So it is a bit of an art form. Now, the things that I wish people spent more time thinking about, and maybe this is from where I sit, I spend a lot of time talking to people about marketing consulting businesses and how you communicate about your services that you provide, about who you are, about what you're doing. I think that if I could go back and do it over again, I'd think about that more strategically from the start. And I think that would mean a couple of things. It would mean having more conversations up front with prospective clients to really understand what their needs were, and really dive into really a problem analysis of sorts. What is the challenge? What can I bring to that? Am I the right person to solve that problem? And thinking creatively about solutions. And second piece I would do is create what I'm now referring to as a minimum viable marketing plan, which is the marketing effort and consistency that you can sustain even when all of the other aspects of your business are at their busiest. So this was especially true for me. I spent a lot of time on proposal writing, on proposal development. I had really significant busy seasons. And what happened every year was I would get to the end of my busy season and I would have nothing scheduled ahead of me because I was too busy to be maintaining that marketing while I was actually doing the client work that I needed to do. So figuring out what that level of kind of consistent minimum you can maintain for yourself while you're doing your busy work, I think is very important. Otherwise, what happens, and this I've seen this like a million times, is you get into this like really significant boom or bust cycle. And that is really, really hard to navigate, both financially and emotionally. It is stressful. So, what I am talking to people about now and recommending is this idea of your minimum viable marketing plan, where it's something that you can keep going. And essentially, what that does is keep a pipeline of prospects going at all times. So you've constantly got new opportunities coming on your radar while you're doing work, because we don't want that consistent cycle of kind of boom and bust. And it's an art form. Again, there's always going to be like a little bit of bring on and bring off that happens over time. But I think that that's a really important thing to consider. And I just saw a question pop up in the chat, and then I lost it. An example of a minimum marketing plan, yes. So I think this is really dependent on who your audience is. If I can give my first marketing plan related tip, it's that not everybody's marketing effort should look the same because your clients are different. So step one of any marketing plan is coming up with where are your clients so that you can be visible in the places where your clients hang out. So for a lot of us who are marketing professional services, often the place where our clients hang out is on LinkedIn. They might be on an industry newsletter. They might be on specific events. They might read specific magazines. They might be on specific other social media sites. The important thing is understanding who your client is and where they are, because you want to be where they are, even if where they are is like a bizarre place that you've never heard of before. That's like the core of it. So whatever your marketing plan is needs to focus on where are those people? Where are they likely to come across you? And then it's about coming up with the appropriate strategy for that. So for me, often my minimum marketing plan is I post on LinkedIn once a week and I send out a monthly e-newsletter. That's like my baseline. And I know that I can maintain that even when I'm super, super busy. For some folks, that might be more frequency. It might be something that they really need to be persistently attending certain events or have certain activities that they have going on. They might need to physically be in specific spaces at specific times. It's really about showing up in the right spot and developing a plan that's going to work for your specific clientele, for your specific audience. Ooh, that's a good question. How much do you use AI to automate your marketing, and what tools do you use? So automate might be a bit extreme for me. I know people have different feelings about AI. I had some very early success, I think, when I started my consulting business on LinkedIn. And at that point in time, 10 years ago, AI wasn't really a thing. So where I was getting a lot of attention was actually talking to people about work stress and burnout, um, and showing up really authentically as myself, someone who had recently had a whole lot of burnout and stress around work. And I think that how that content and that story I was telling connected with people has made me a bit hesitant to put too much reliance on AI for really automating things. What I do use it for is helping me brainstorm ideas and get off of a blank page. And then I'm primarily using either the Google built-in AI because it is included in my Google Workspace, Gemini. Um, or I had been using for a while a different AI that was specifically for marketing people that was designed to help with social content and email marketing. I think it's about finding the tool that works well for you and using it for the right thing more so than anything else. I have seen people who develop whole marketing plans based on what AI tells them to do. And usually what I find is that that ultimately becomes unsustainable because it's not interesting to the person who's doing it. You're essentially outsourcing it completely, and that's probably fine in some cases. But I find that you really want to be the one that's telling your story to other people. So using it in a strategic way to communicate that is the most helpful thing to do. Um, I always think that really the three most important areas for people to show up in marketing efforts is email outreach, which can look like emailing people you know, conversations and networking, and content or social proof online. And those are really the three areas that tend to get the most traction. Sometimes I think we talk about marketing and people only think about social, and I do want to get away from that kind of thinking. Um, I had a couple of other thoughts, but I realize we've gone off on this marketing tangent for a little bit, and I want to stay there if people are interested, because I think that that is something that is a challenge to get used to. Even if you spent a lot of time in communications or marketing for a firm or for an institution, switching to marketing your own services is really a different feeling. Um, and I do think that that's important to recognize and that mental shift that you have to make, especially when a lot of us have been socialized to not toot our own horns, so to speak. Um, this is a mindset shift about how you approach communicating about your services and about what you do to other people.
I'll jump in, Whitney. Oh wait, Haley has a question. Let's do Haley first.
Oh, Haley's got a good question. Haley said that they're submitting a proposal to an RFP process soon, and asked about my experience responding to open calls for consultation support. The open call. I refer to it as a black box. Um, and while it can be useful, especially if it's like the perfect right thing at the right time, in my experience, that's never the first place that I recommend that people spend their time. And this is largely just due to my own experience. I have checked a lot of things into the black box, and almost always the best results come when I have a personal relationship that I can draw upon to get an introduction, or when I can have a personal conversation with somebody that I think might be a prospective client. And part of that is because it's really about understanding what their challenges are. And that's really hard to do from an RFP. Um, so the more that I can have those conversations up front, the better. And this may sound a little bit strange, but responding to an RFP can sometimes, if it's like the perfect, aligned, excellent opportunity for you, is the greatest thing. However, oftentimes there is a piece of the request that is really great for you and another piece that is not something that you really want to be doing. Often this is just the way that these things get bundled from the people that are putting them out. And I can see RFPs drawing people toward work that is not their favorite, not what they want to be doing. So I always caution against that in terms of a like truly responsive approach. In new business development speak, I always refer to that as letting the client tell you what you want to be doing rather than being really in charge of your own consulting business. Sometimes I refer to it as, letting somebody else be the pilot of your plane. They're going to take you in a direction that you don't necessarily want to go. Now, that said, I think that responding to RFPs is an important skill to develop, and it is a skill. Learning to speak to a client's interests, learning to meet all the compliance requirements, make sure you've checked all the boxes. So I do think that that's a good exercise. And it's something that people can get better at over time. But I always like to accompany it with a personal contact if I can. I saw a hand raise. Is that Alma?
Thanks so much, Whitney, for being here. And maybe you'll get to this a little bit later. Sorry if I'm jumping the gun, but can you talk a little bit about like lead generation? So essentially identifying potential clients. Obviously the personal connections, that makes total sense. Like I have a client right now that just came through someone that I worked in the past with, but how do you build that pipeline? Do you just build a list of potential clients and send them all a personal message? Like, are there some tools or best practices, things?
I was looking around my desk because there's usually a book here. Oh, there it is. There's a book here. That is my reference point for lead generation all the time. All the time. It's this, and it's very short. The book is called Talking to Humans, which sounds ridiculous. I'll also give a shout out that most of the pages in here are comics. So this isn't going to take very long to read. The entire premise of this book is that the best way to build the best services is by constantly having conversations with your clients and prospective clients. And I actually think that that's really important to understand early on. Because what can happen is that we design services that nobody's interested in. And instead, what we want to be doing is really being deeply connected to the challenges that we're trying to solve. And the way that we understand that is by having these conversations with people. And I really like to emphasize that this book and the strategy that they outline is not about having sales conversations with people. It's not about talking to people about what solution you can provide. It's about having conversations with them about what their struggles are. So it does come down to reaching out to people, getting introductions when you can, continually having those conversations. But I like to think of it as a more organic process than we necessarily do at first glance. This is always about making sure that you are really understanding the challenge first. And I think that what that does for prospective clients is make it so that every time they think of you, they think, oh, that person like really gets it. They like know what I'm dealing with. And that means that when they do have the resources to tackle that challenge, they're going to come to you. This is not a short-term game. This is a long-term game. So I think that lead cultivation practice is almost in all cases more time intensive than people think it's going to be when they first start consulting, because you need to get those introductions, you need to have these conversations with people, and that needs to continuously happen throughout your entire consulting journey. How you get introduced to the right people really depends, again, on where your clients are likely hanging out. So that's where your marketing plan can come in, and it's where that networking piece comes in as well, making sure that you're expanding your contacts in the area or industry or the type of client that you want to be working with. The other thing I would say is just everybody needs a pipeline. if you don't have one already. A pipeline for me is just an Excel spreadsheet that is, or a Google Sheets document that is tracking what opportunities are on your radar, what the timeline is for them, who the person is you're contacting, and where are they in like the business development process? Is this like an early inquiry that you had? Is this something that is in the like process of coming together? Is this something that you've submitted a formal estimate for? Is this something that's been decided? Having a simple tool like that is something that will really help you stay organized when you have all of these different balls in the air. Another question come into. Ooh, that's a good question. So this is about when you're supporting a company to write a proposal for funding. Do you charge them a percentage of the total anticipated project budget after they win? I have heard both sides of this. I've heard it from consultants who want to be able to do this. And I have heard it from clients who want to pay me based on whether or not their proposal is successful. I would say generally it's a no on both fronts. First, because generally paying for proposal expenses has historically been an unallowable cost for my good friends at USAID. So they cannot do that most of the time. This is true if you're working for a lot of different funders. Some of them aren't like this. So if your client is advocating for this, this is a possibility. However, on your side of things, having your pay be contingent on the success of something that you do not have full control over is a dangerous game. And I say that as somebody who's written a lot of proposals. I've got like a lot. I've written a lot of proposals over the years. And most of the time, the success of that proposal is way outside of my control because I'm just, the person who's writing it down on paper, not the person who's designed the project. And I can't affect their long-term positioning strategy and how they've done everything else. So I'm very hesitant to tie my compensation to whether or not they're successful. If that were a nice bonus on top of my regular rate, I might consider it. But that's generally not how I've seen people try to put that into a contract. Maybe other people have different risk tolerances than I do, but that's generally my approach to it. I saw an anonymous question go in about what percentage of time you spend on marketing efforts and client recruitment versus doing the actual work. And this is a very important question to be asking, because one of the things that I see when people first start working for themselves and first start freelancing, and especially when people go about setting their rates for the first time, they think about the amount of time that they have in a year, and then they start breaking down their previous salary based on that, the total amount of years. But the actual billable hours that you have, if you work on typically hourly contracts, or even the number of projects you can fit into a year, is not going to be equivalent to the full number of hours that you might have worked in a full-time job. And that is because of exactly things like this. And it's not just marketing, it's also the administrative side of your business, the financial management side of your business, marketing things, all of the project management that is not billable time. All of those things take a lot of time. And how much time they take is going to vary significantly person to person. Because some of us are very efficient with administrative tasks, some of us are very efficient with writing marketing content. All of these things are a little bit different. So what I will say to everyone is hopefully we all have gotten a little free or nearly free time tracking software set up that is going to help us track time for our billable work. Add into your time tracking system categories for admin, finance, and marketing, and track how much time you're spending on those activities, because that will give you that sense of how much time is it taking me to do all of these other operational labor activities, and then how much time does that leave me for actual client work. And it's going to vary differently depending on the kind of work that you're doing. So I don't want to say that there's like a blanket percentage. I think over the years, this has varied from 10% of my time to 40% of my time, depending on what I'm trying to do. So I think it can vary pretty wildly. So track it and find out for yourself what it's looking like. This will have a really big impact about the number of hours that you're actually working. If you try to fill your time with 100% billable work, you're going to really rapidly figure out that you don't actually have the time in your day to be able to do that. Or you have to make that time in your day by cutting into something else, like your family time or your personal time that you really don't want to be doing. And I've seen it a lot, especially when people are starting out, because you want to get booked and busy right away. So you have a tendency to overload yourself at the beginning. Oh, Caitlin, good question about time tracking programs. I have a few favorites. One of the ones that I've used pretty consistently over the years is Harvest, which is actually a project tracking software. And it also includes, you can create estimates and send invoices in Harvest. So if that's something that you're also looking for, I believe that their website is harvestapp.com. That can be a really good system, especially if you're likely to have multiple projects going on at the same time. However, it's not free. So I think it costs like $12 per person per month or something like that. So it's kind of a step up. I think that I had been using, previous to that, I had been using Toggl, Toggl, I believe, which was a time tracking system. I honestly don't actually know if that still exists. The other one that a lot of people use is Clockify, which is a free time tracking system that a lot of people find very useful. Just to put it out there, though, a good old-fashioned Excel spreadsheet will do just fine if that's something that works best for you. Map is great for me personally because I forget what I have done and go back and forth on activities. But the time tracking system that I'm using right now is actually through Gusto, which if you happen to be hiring yourself as an employee because your accountant told you to for tax purposes, they have a time tracking system that's built in to their payroll system, which is a thing that is needed if you happen to be paying yourself as an employee. Having somebody else do all of your payroll tax math is worth the, I think, $15 a month I pay them. I love talking about the operational side of consulting. I spend a lot of time talking about the strategy side of like designing your service offerings, designing how you're going to communicate about that in your marketing efforts, how you actually deal with clients and client management. But the operational stuff is like, there is no roadmap for these things. And trial and error is genuinely the way that I've learned about most of them over the years. So it's a process of figuring it out, but that's where finding community with people is really helpful, because then you don't have to do all of the research yourself. Okay, I saw Deborah's question, and then Lori's hand, and then Salome's question, I think, in order. So starting with Deborah's question, when would it be realistic to expect to match your last salary after 1 year? Totally varies. Totally varies. I think that when I first started consulting, I hit the same salary that I wanted to get to after at the end of my second year. So essentially, like, I think I was like halfway there my first year and then hit it my second year. But this wildly depends on if you're doing the same kind of work and if the same kind of work still exists. So I think it also depends on like how many clients you were able to get right away, and if you have those established relationships that you can draw on. So I think one of the things that I talk about, I have this on-ramp to freelance consulting class, and one of the things that we talk about in like the first session is risk tolerance and what the affordable loss is to you to invest in this work. I also spent a lot of time talking to my therapist about this year. What are you actually willing to put in to figure out what the reward is going to be? And that is really, really personal. Like, do you have 3 months of an on-ramp to see where this goes and whether it's going to pan out and be sustainable? Do you have a year? What is the affordable risk that you can take in order to see what happens? Because nobody can tell you exactly when it's going to reach the goal that you want to reach. So it's about figuring out for yourself what that affordable loss is. Now, for me this year, I feel like I'm constantly redoing this math for myself based on how I happen to feel in a given week, which is probably not great, but is an important piece to figuring out whether or not this feels truly sustainable for me. So I think that that's an important thing to be thinking about. So while I can't actually give you an answer to your question, I do think that that's an important consideration to have in mind. How long can you realistically afford to work before you are meeting your last salary? And then that's your timeline for success. And maybe it's after 6 months, you have to reevaluate and decide whether this is the path you can keep going down. Because I think that that's a really important consideration. Lori, I saw your hand next.
Yeah, thanks, Whitney. This has been super helpful, and I really appreciate your time. My question kind of follows on where you were just going. I was curious about what you're seeing in terms of trends with demand for consulting in the current environment. And I've been wondering, like, maybe people aren't really hiring because of all the uncertainty, and there's actually some more consulting. On the other hand, all of the consulting associated with USAID has evaporated. And so I haven't done a lot of work myself to try to understand this question, but I'd really love your perspective on like how you think demand for consulting in international development or international development adjacent type fields looks, or if we are thinking about consulting, should we really try to get away from international development realm into some other type of work? So just generally your thoughts. I
Really
really
good
appreciate
question.
them.
Yeah. I feel like I need to caveat this with the statement that I keep giving, which I have given up trying to predict where the US government will go next this year, because I don't know what's going to happen. And it's really, I would have never expected what we saw earlier this year and continue to see, honestly. What I can say is from my experience, I went into this year again with the whole team at Bid Boss and 6 years of experience. doing this with about 35 active contracts for a team of consultants, to be clear, not just myself. And by February, that was down to about 4. So that drop off was considerable and it was fast. And a lot of that was because we were doing USAID proposal development. So natural consequence. Where I am now, again, having that history and having what is now a much smaller team, I have about 3 or 4 active contracts. So while that took a significant nosedive, what I have seen over the last month and a half, is that things are climbing back up. People are starting to ask for support again. People are starting to realize that they can't actually deliver the things that they were supposed to do without staff, and they need to hire someone to temporarily fill that role. I am starting to see, I was talking to a friend of mine who studies, it's like a business academic the other day, and she was saying kind of largely what is happening is a shift toward less secure employment, consulting being part of that, because we're not getting benefits. We have no assurances if contracts get canceled. A lot of it's variable and not predictable. That shift is happening and has been happening across industries for a while now, which sounds like there's going to be more consulting work. But I want to recognize that there's also more competition for consulting work than there ever has been. I started out and maintain that I value community a lot more than I value winning any one competition. And I strongly encourage other people to live their lives in the same way, because it's more fun when we can be friends instead of competitors. But I do think that there's a lot happening right now, and being strategic about how you communicate about your work and how you promote that work is an important part of this. I used to say that people could hop into consulting and I had more work than there was people to do it in development for years now, probably since I started 10 years ago. I don't think that that's true anymore. I think you have to be intentional, and you have to have the mindset that this is not just about doing quality work. It's about how you communicate to potential clients. It's about how you cultivate those relationships. It's about how you manage yourself and you manage your time efficiently. So I think there's less space for less intentional, just like, I'm going to be a consultant and I'm just going to like live on a beach and it's going to be wonderful. I mean, maybe you can do that, but not everyone can do that. So I want to recognize that. I don't think that there's no work there, though. I think that there's still a lot of work to be done. And I think for the people who have the right mindset about it, they can find that work, they can do great jobs at that work, and they can build those client relationships. It's still there. And I think it's still going to be there in one form or another going forward. Although I should really knock on something. Who knows what's happening anymore, honestly. Okay, I saw a question about good daily rates without scaring off clients. Ah, yes. Two things. One, your daily rate's going to vary wildly. So there's no blanket answer to this question. It should be a combination of what's realistic to sustain you, your experience and expertise level, the demand for the kind of work that you're doing, and the type of client that you're doing that work for. A lot of us could be doing project management for tiny NGOs. A lot of us could be doing that same project management work for big finance firms. The work's the same. The rate you should charge them is not. So a lot of this is really dependent on who your client is and who you are and where you sit at that nexus. The second part of your question, the scaring off clients, is something that we are much more worried about than our clients are, because the amount that people pay us is highly personal to us and not to anyone else. That other people aren't feeling about it the same way that we are. And what I see, and I will say, I would say, especially with women, we have a tendency to negotiate with ourselves before anybody asks us to. And what I mean by that is we see an opportunity and we think, well, they must not be able to, I don't think that they're going to be able to afford this rate. So I'm just going to drop my rate by 15% before anybody asks me to. Collectively, can we please stop doing that? Because it's bad practice. Like, yes, if you are hearing from your clients that the primary reason that they're not hiring you for assignments is that your rate is too high, that is market data that you should listen to. But you should not propose a lower rate than you think is appropriate just because you're afraid that you might not get the assignment based on your rate. And I think that that's a really important distinction to make. And I think that's where I want people to be focused. What is the rate that you think is appropriate based on the market research that you've done? And then hold on to it until somebody tells you otherwise. I also want to say really quickly on rates that your rate does not need to be your rate forever. The rate that you gave your first client is not the rate that you should give your second client. It's not the rate that you should give your fifth client. It's not the rate you should give your client next year. It should constantly be evolving. And the reason that I say that is I started out consulting at a rate that I didn't have a lot of confidence in my negotiating authority with on my first contract for my first consulting assignment right after I'd lost my job. That consulting rate, I took to the next client and I put a 5% on top of it and they didn't bat an eye. And then I took it to the next client and I upped it by 10% and they didn't bat an eye. And I just kept doing that until somebody said that they weren't hiring me because my rate was too high. Because that's what collecting market data looks like in this work. I think that, I think there was another question, but Kathleen, I'm going to jump down to yours about where you get market data outside of one-off conversations. I'm not sure if I would trust AI to generate that. I might need to run some scenarios and see if I trust it. Honestly, talking to people who have been consulting for a long time, especially in an area that you're working in, is the best way to do that. Some people are really guarded about this information. That is silly. I'm actually gearing up to do an annual survey that I do of all the consultants that I know to try and get some information about market rates. I think that that's important to understand. But again, it's going to vary really considerably based on who you're working with and where you're based and everything. If anybody is questioning their rate and they work in international development, shoot me an email and I will tell you if you're wildly off. This is when I kept saying that I'm like a really bad business person because I hire a lot of subcontractors, especially through my work at Bid Boss. And every time somebody came into me and told me that they were charging something that was half what I thought it should be, I told them because I'm not going to charge clients for that. I'm not going to charge clients a ridiculously low rate just because you said you'd work a ridiculously low rate, and I'll tell you that it's low, and we'll figure out where it's supposed to be. I do think that that's important to keep in mind as you're getting started. The question I skipped. Have I second guessed my decision to be a consultant? Well, yeah, this year, oof, Oof. Oof. I'm the primary income in my house, and I bought a house in November. Yeah, I definitely questioned my consulting decision. And I've questioned it over the years. I've thought, like, would it be easier to go back and like do a full-time job again? And every time I do that, I land on, I don't know if anyone would want to hire me to be a full-time person. I haven't been into an office regularly in 10 years. I'm not even sure I know how to be a grown-up in an office. But that's also me personally. I've considered it. I've considered it for all of the reasons that everyone should consider it, which is consistency, stability, somebody paying for your health insurance. All of those things are very real. There's this, the ebb and flow of consulting work is a very real stressor, and some people handle it much better than others. And I think all of those things are really important considerations when you're moving into working for yourself, regardless of whether you're working for yourself as a freelance consultant or setting up a small business or whatever you're doing. That is a risky thing to do. It makes you an entrepreneur, whether you like it or not. And I think that entering that without any blinders on about what that means for your job security, for your paycheck security is really important. And no one should go in just thinking like this is going to be easy and I'll be living my best life, traveling all the time, and I don't know, whatever your best life is, going to Pilates on Thursday mornings. Like that'll be great. But also there's going to be some times when it feels not so great. So I think if you're questioning it, you're in the norm. That's the norm. Keep questioning it. Keep coming back to see if this is the thing that's actually like the best thing for you right now. That's a good idea. And the great thing about consulting is you can always decide not to be doing that. Like full-time jobs are there. It's been a whole year though, and I understand that. But I think that there you can always go back to looking at other options. That's always a possibility.
Whitney, I see we have one more question, but that we're also at time. I'm not sure if you have a hard stop or if we can do one last question.
I do not have a hard stop, so we could do, I actually saw 2 more questions. Really quickly, Deborah's question, is there a good place to find out which marketplace plans people like per state? No. I hate that that doesn't exist. There should really be a rating system on all of them, right? Like we should be able to give them a star system. The best way that I've found this information is to go to your state's Reddit, the subreddit for your state, and see if anybody has complained about anything. But in my experience, the information is very thin, very hard to find, which is very frustrating. And then the other question was from Christina. Without prior consulting experience, how do you recommend one to break in when it's not on your CV already? What about finding consulting groups to work with? Very good questions. I think that it's actually really important to think about breaking into consulting as just like starting any other job in a way. Generally, people aren't hiring you as a consultant because of your experience as a consultant. They're hiring you because of the other information that you bring, the knowledge, the skills, the experience. So it's about packaging those things in a way that responds to what your potential clients needs. Having previous consulting experience isn't necessarily the thing. I do think that being able to learn things quickly, settle in with a new team, get familiar with new systems, all of those things can be really good assets. But generally, I think what helps people hire consultants is understanding them, knowing their experience and what it means. So I wouldn't think about it like something that you necessarily are breaking into, unless you're totally shifting industries and none of your historical experience is relevant to what you're doing now. That's a different ballgame. But if you're doing something that's more or less aligned with what your previous experience was, I think that's really useful to have. And then there was a second part to that question about finding consulting groups to work with. Pros and cons, pros and cons. I obviously ran a consulting firm for 6 years, so I'm a little bit biased. Sometimes it's great. That's essentially somebody else doing your marketing for you if it works out right. It's somebody else having your information. Now, 100% of the time, you should be charging a higher rate for your work outside of a consulting firm than you charge for it inside a consulting firm. And that's because you're doing all your own admin and marketing. So you should be charging higher rates outside of a consulting firm. Firms are okay, I would say. You don't have a lot of control. You don't have a lot of control about whether somebody's going to put your name forward for assignments. You don't always see all of the assignments that that team gets, and you don't ultimately have control over the relationships with clients that you're developing. In fact, sometimes, and check the contract that you have with a consulting firm when you look at it, they might include language about non-competes or exclusivity. There's language about like not actually going to work for a client that you worked for previously unless you go through that consulting firm. So I'd be cautious about it, but it can be a really good way for some people to find really consistent work if they find the right firm that's going to be the right partner, really. And I would say that it's more worthwhile to work through a consulting firm where you actually get face time with the people who actually own the consulting firm and are doing the matchmaking work, doing the management work. If you can't get face time with a consulting firm, you're not anything more than a CV in a folder. And that doesn't go very far. I've seen a bunch of people dropping off, which probably means we should wrap up, but this has been so much fun again. I love it.
Whitney, thank you so much. And I know I said this last time, but like in a time when like pressures are high, I really appreciate like the calm and like pragmatic way you approach all of this. I love that you love operations and nuts and bolts. Like I just love all the things that you bring to these discussions. I did want to give you an opportunity. If you want to work with Whitney, she has some exciting things coming up. I will include them in the newsletter coming out. But Whitney, anything you wanted to say?
Yeah, I'm going to drop a link in the chat really quick. I have the next cohort of the course that I developed earlier this year, On Ramp to Freelance Consulting, is starting in the middle of October, on October 13th. I've still got a handful of spots left in that class, in that group. It's going to be a small group of less than 12 people. So we're keeping it small, so lots of FaceTime. It's 6 weeks with live meetings with me, along with videos and a whole suite of tools, including my actual rate sheet that I use with clients. So you can see some awesome information. Basically covers everything from strategy to operations to making an annual budget for yourself. All of these things I think are important, and it's been really fun to do. So if anybody's interested in that, check it out.
Great. And again, I'll include Whitney's socials and a little blurb about this in our email with hopefully the video. I lost internet in the middle, so hopefully it recorded. But again, yeah, me too. Thank you so much, Whitney. Again, everyone loves chatting with you, and I love all the energy that you bring to this and the community that you continue to show up for, both in our tiny community, but also the larger community. So thanks so much, Whitney. I hope you have a wonderful vacation, much deserved. And to all of you out there, thank you so much for continuing to show up for Pivoting Parents. Keep an eye out for further events. If you want to come on screen and wave goodbye, I'd love to see your faces. And yeah, thanks for your time, everyone. I appreciate it. Hi, Magna.